Hey guys. All right, so let's talk about finding the greatest common factors. So the very first thing we need to talk about is greatest. So I know I'm going to have the biggest. Common means the same, and I talk about factor. And factors are those numbers that we multiply together to equal that whatever number we're talking about, right? Remember when you were in 6th grade, you guys drew your factor rainbows. Usually you started with 1 and your other end of the rainbow was talking about whatever numbers. So on this one, I would have my 1 and I'd have my 30. So I'm going to show you 2 ways for this first one. And then after that, I'm going to show you what I think it's a little bit quicker. Okay. So the first way we're going to do is we're going to make a list of each of the factors. Let me show you when I started with 30, I'm always going to start with my 1 and I'm going to do 1 and I do 1 times 30. That is a factor, right? If I do 2, I can do 2 times 15. So 2 is a factor. 3 times 10 is a factor. I cannot do 4 times anything and equals 30, but I can do 5. 5 times 6 gives me 30. 7 times, I cannot do that. 8, I cannot do that. And 9, I cannot do that. And once I get to the 10, I'm back at where I started. So these are my factors of 30. Now let's talk about my 12. So when I list my 12s, right, 1 times 12 is 12. 2 times 6 is 12. 3 times 4 is 12. Right? This is my factor rainbow, right? I could kind of make my rainbows connecting each of those pairs, right? But these are my factors. And I'm going to look for common factors first, right? So I'm going to underline all the common factors. So when I talk about my common factors, I'm talking about that's the number that's on both lists, right? The same. When I find my greatest, I have to find the biggest one. So my biggest one on each of these is going to be 6. So my greatest common factor for 30 and 12 is going to be 6. Okay, so this is one way to do that. I'm going to show you the other way, and this involves our prime factorization, right? So prime factorization, that's where we made our trees. And prime is going to be the smallest. So then remember, this is also going back to 6th grade, right? Prime is talking about the only factors for that number are 1 and itself, right? So that's where I'm usually going to have like my, when I'm at my prime factorization, my bottom part's going to be like my 2 times 3 times something, okay? So when I start with my prime factorization, that's usually on top. Now each of these branches, I'm going to keep going down until I have like my prime numbers. So I'm going to start, I can either start here with like a 2 or I see a 3's in this and I know it's after. So I'm going to put my 3 here. So when I put my 3 here, I did my 3 times 10 to get my 30. So each of these branches come down. I'm always going to have 2 off. I know when I get to my 10, I know this is not prime. So I'm going to make my 2 branches off that. And I have my 2 and my 5. So each of these that's at the end, and if you remember, you may have circled those. So here's going to be my prime factorization for 30. Okay, and now I'm going to do the same thing for the 12. So because I started with my 3, I'm going to put a 3 here. And I know 3 times 4 is what gives me 12. I could have done 2 times 6. It doesn't matter. Whenever I go here, but remember my first branch, I'm usually going to try to pick a prime number. So it's going to be the 2 or a 3 or maybe it's a 5, depending on what your number is. So then I know 4 is an even number. Because I know 4 is an even number, I'm going to divide it by 2. And 2 times 2 is going to give me 4. It gives me the 4. So then I'm going to use these branches. And I just kind of rewrite it. So I go from the smallest to the largest prime number. So here's my prime factorization for 12. 2 times 2 times 3, right? 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 3 is 12. Same thing here. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 5 is 30. And then the way I find my greatest common factor is I just take a look at what is common. Notice I have my 2 times 3 on each of these. So 2 times 3 is going to give me 6. And that's where I get this 6 here. I think this method's faster. You decide if you'd rather just make your list or if you do your pairs. Okay, so I'm going to practice just because we don't normally do our pairs. I'm going to practice doing our prime factorization to find that. Okay. So on this one, I have an 8 and a 6. So when I bring them down, right, so remember my one branch is going to have the 2, and then 2 times 4 gives me 8. I'm going to bring those down, and I have 2 times 2 gives me that. So when I take the numbers at the end of my branches, the end of my tree, I get 2 times 2 times 2. When I do 6, I'm going to use my 2, and I have 2 times 3, right? And that's it, because that's how I have it. So I have my 2 times 3. So in this case, maybe doing a list help. However, when I take a look at this, remember in this one, I had my 2 times 3. Well, here I have 2 times 3, but I don't have that there. So that leaves me with 2 is my greatest common factor here, right? And if I looked at that, 1's going to be the same on each of ours, right? I'd have 1, 2, 3, 6. This one I'd have 1, 2, 4, 8. So it kind of makes sense. That's where my 2 comes from. Now 40 and 15, I probably would rather use my prime factorization instead of make my list of everything. So that's why, so I'm going to do that again. So when I make my prime factorization for my 40, remember I'm always going to try to put the my prime number on the outside. Notice this gave me a whole bunch down because it could have gone a little bit bigger, or I could have even gone, since I know 45 is a factor, I could have put 5 over here, and this would have been 8. And then it's going to go down. But I'm also making sure as I practice here and show you, if you're not sure of what some of the factors are, at least you know when it's here in the 0, you know 2 will be a factor because that's an even number. So that's why I'm showing you this way. So it leaves a couple more branches, but that's okay. So I know that I'm looking at this number here that's at the end of the branches. Okay, so that's where I get 2 times 2 times 2, which is coming from here. 2 times 2 times 2 times 5. On this one, I have 3 times 5. So if I look at these lists, I do not have any 2's here. Here I have a 3. I don't have a 3. So this 5 is going to be my greatest common factor. So 5 is the greatest common factor for 40 and 15. Okay. When I look at 15 and 10, because I know already that these are smaller ones for me, I'd probably use more of the list on this one. And I also know that 5 is a common factor of each of these, but let's make the list so we can take a look to see, is there anything bigger? So when I make my list, and remember this is like if I was doing the rainbow, 1, 3, 5, 15 are my factors of 15, right? Because remember 1 times 15 is 15 and 3 times 5 is 15. For 10, I'm going to have 1, 2, 5, and 10. 1 times 10 is 10 and 2 times 5 is 10. So 1 is common, 5 is common. So my greatest common factor here is going to be 5. Let's take a look at 5 and 40. Well, I know already that 5 is prime. So when 5 is prime, I already know that if 5 is one of the factors for 40, I know that for this one, 5 is going to automatically be that. And if you need to see, let's make a list of the factors of 40, right? So 40, I can do 1. I do 1 times 40, so I'll kind of move over. I kind of like to have my space, so I have my 40 over here. I know that 2 times 20, and notice I'm kind of going backwards. This is like my rainbow, okay? I cannot do 3 times anything to equal 40, but I know I can do 4, right? 4 times 10 gives me 40. And 5, if I do 5 times 8 gives me 40. I cannot do 6 times anything to equal 40, 7 times anything to equal 40, and 9 doesn't equal 40. So here's my list. When I look this way, 5 is going to be my greatest because for 5, I only have 1 and 5 because that is a prime number. So that's how I know right away. Okay, let's talk about 6 and 5. Okay, so same thing on this one. I would make my list instead of doing my tree just because. So this one gets a little bit trickier. This one's not really tricky as much as it's just kind of weird because it's the first one that happened. 6 is an even number and 5 is a prime number that's also odd. Okay, so When I make my list of all my factors, the greatest common factor is 1. That's why that seems kind of weird, but that is the right answer. When I have 6 and 2, okay, so the same idea. 1 and 2 are the factors of 2. Well, I can do 2 times 3, so I don't even need to make a list. I know right away my greatest common factor of these two numbers is 2. When I look at 30 and 2, kind of the same way. 30 is divisible by 2. 2 times 15 gives me 30. So same idea. 2 is going to be my greatest common factor because of the fact that we have 1 and 2 are the only factors for this. So I really have to think about that to say, hey, is that going to work? Okay. And then let's look at 10 and 24. Okay, let's go back so that we practice our factors, so that we're doing our prime factorization. Okay, so when I do my prime factorization, I'm going to have my 2 times 5 gives me 10. So there's going to be my prime factorization. Remember, I told you I'm going to pull out my 2 just because I know that this is a even number. I also could have done 3 here because I know 3 times 8 would give me 24. So I could have had a 3 here and then I would add an 8 and this would have been a 2 and a 4 and then kind of gone down. But either way, it doesn't matter. So I chose to use the 2 and then I'm going to have my 12. And then I know that 12 is an even number. So I'm going to pull this out. And I also know that kind of the other way too. I know 3 and 4 are factors of 12. So I went to the 3 because that's going to be bigger. Again, I could have had 2 and 6 here and just kind of gone down. And I ended up with the ends of my tree. I have 2, 3, 2, 2. So I just kind of put them in order. I took all the 2s first. And when I look at that, right, I have a 2 and a 5 here. So I don't have a 5 here. So that means that this 2 is going to be my greatest common factor there. Okay. When I look at 2 and 24, well, we're kind of back at the same thing. Sorry, guys, I didn't make this sheet. That was something I found, but I hope that it gives you some ideas. Okay, 2, we have 1 and 2, so that's the only factors of 2, and 24 is divisible, or I can say 2 is a factor of 24, 2 times 12. So my greatest common factor on these two is going to be 2. Okay, I hope that helps a bit. Remember, if you have any more questions, let me know and I'll help you.